Welcome everybody to this talk about electronic navigation and the work of the working group, which is working towards an approval system for electronic navigation charts and systems designed for leisure vessels. I'm Paul Bryans. By background, I'm a RYA Yachtmaster instructor and examiner, including ocean, but for the purpose of this talk, I'm wearing my hat as chair of the Small Craft Group Committee of RYA and also chair of the Pleasure Vessel Navigation Systems Working Group. This is a working group under UK SON, which is the UK Safety of Navigation Committee, which is hosted by the MCA. Just to cover a bit of the background, I'll mention what RYA does, who we are, and before I come on to the meat of the talk. RYA was established after the war by Royal Navy and RAF navigators, but it has always had a very large leisure sailing fraternity, and indeed Mike Ritchie, the well-known single-handed yachtsman, was the first director and held that post for some 35 years. RYA is a charity, a learned society and a professional body. Now, as I said, I'm the chair of the Small Craft Group. What does the Small Craft Group do? It is the special interest group for people who are interested in navigating small craft, which is basically anything under 24 meters. These are mainly leisure sailors, and I say sailors because it is predominantly sailors, although there are a few motorboaters in amongst them. There are also quite a number of RYA instructors and examiners and also professional skippers in the group. Our role is to promote the interests of navigation interests of such users. We are compulsory consultee and navigation matters, and we attend MCA, UKHO and General Lighthouse Authority consultative meetings. We run various events on behalf of members, Winter Talks program, but conference and events, which I'll come on to in a second, and also publications, which I'll be talking about. The conferences in the past were in-person events, but this year we are moving on to hybrid events. Obviously, the last couple of years have rather devastated our program and caused a lot of rescheduling. But there are two main conferences that we organize on a biennial basis, and they alternate in years, or that's the intention anyway. The Electronic Navigation Conference and Weather and Sailing. Now, the next Weather and Sailing Conference will be held at the RNLI in Poole in October, but the Electronic Navigation Conference, if you missed it, it was last weekend at the Royal Yacht Squadron. Most of you will be aware that we published the Guide to Electronic Navigation Systems just over a year ago. This booklet, and it's now being published as a paper copy, was funded by Trinity House. It was written by a range of experts and edited expertly by Dr. Jane Russell. It's endorsed by the RYA, the MCA and the RNLI. The free download is still available, and it has been downloaded probably by the time you listen to this almost 4,000 times. And as I say, the printed book has literally arrived on my doorstep 5 minutes ago. So there it is. And those are the people who contributed to the booklet. Now, when we wrote the booklet, we came up with a number of issues that we felt should be recommendations that would accompany the booklet. And those recommendations are on the RYN website and can be downloaded as well. But the main issue that we always kept coming up against was that the electronic equipment that we use on leisure vessels was always described as not to be used for navigation. Now, initially, I personally thought that was a disclaimer by the manufacturers, but I've since discovered through the work of the committee that the hydrographic officers who supply data to the leisure chart publishers state in their contract terms that the charts are to be described as not to be used for navigation. Also, clearly, they are not approved by any official body, so they cannot be described as official documents. Now, this leads to a number of problems. One that Craig pointed out to me is that the RYA is designing training courses to teach people how to navigate with systems that are not to be used for navigation, which is a bit of a conundrum. However, these systems are now the default means of navigation for very many people. Paper charts, as you will appreciate, are often not being carried on less well-educated by less well-educated sailors, and the availability is declining. UKHO withdrawing the leisure folios for one. So the position on leisure vessels, non-SOLAS vessels, is totally different from that. I made a presentation to UK SON not quite a year ago at a virtual meeting, and I find that it was like pushing at an open door. There was lots of support from various people on the virtual meeting and examples of problems that vessels and people had got into as a result of improper use of electronic systems were mentioned. We agreed terms of reference, which I'll come on to in a second. And those terms of reference were limited to pleasure vessels. In other words, leisure vessels, but pleasure vessels is the official term in MCA speak. And the membership consisted of RYN, the MCA, UKHO, MAIB, as an observer, RYA, RNLI, Trinity House, blah, blah, blah. So what were we trying to do? Well, we were aware that there had been at least one previous initiative within the UK known as Miniectus. Now, that was a system set up really by the fishing industry to try to get smaller systems, smaller approved systems onto fishing vessels. The problem with ECTA systems for ships is that they are very large and they do not lend themselves to carriage on really anything under 300 tons, probably 3,000 tons. I've since become aware that there were a number of initiatives in Denmark and Italy. Now, those could all be characterized as being very similar in that they involve detailed specifications, and none of those systems have actually been successful, basically because they they were trying to replicate Miniectus, but in miniature, and they really failed on commercial grounds because no manufacturer could see that they would make money out of producing them. This leads to a number of difficulties for leisure vessels, but also for coded vessels, sailing school boats, fishing vessels, and small patrol boats. Again, since setting up the working group, I've been approached by a couple of manufacturers who have both said that they have struggled to provide navigation equipment for naval vessels which satisfy what the Navy thinks a coded vessel should have. Although naval vessels are obviously excluded from any coding requirement, they do like their vessels to be of a type which would pass coding if required. And one of the issues for them is if they're going to navigate electronically, which they do, they would like systems that would be approved. And clearly they can't get Miniectus machines on their vessels, so they have a problem. Now, set out here are the exact terms of reference. I haven't précised them at all. Just these 3 bullet points: to propose minimum standards, to explore a means for approval, and to discuss with electronic chart and display system equipment manufacturers the most efficient approach. Well, obviously, what we're doing is starting the discussion with the chart manufacturers and display system equipment manufacturers to see if we can agree minimum standards. So we are working closely with everybody to try to make this work. Now, as I said in the previous slide, the systems that have been arrangements that have been tried previously, both in the UK and elsewhere, had failed because they set out detailed specifications. And it was clear that setting out a specification was not going to be something that was likely to work. So what we proposed was that we would try to find a way of working around that. Really, the situation is that the current electronic charts work very well. The systems work very well. They're established. And there seems to be nothing inherently wrong with them. It's just that they lack approval. So we had to come up with an approval system that would work for those systems, perhaps with a little bit of tweaking, but without imposing detailed specifications or standards on them. So what we are doing is we have drafted a document which has lots of blanks in it at the moment of minimum standards. This seeks to set out an output specification which the chart publishers and the equipment manufacturers will need to meet. If they do meet this minimum standard, there are standards, then they should achieve recognition. We are only looking at the core functionality of the equipment, and that's the important thing to us. And as far as the charts are concerned, what we are looking at is the sources of data. Quality assurance is likely to be the way forward in this. And there is an ISO standard at the moment for electronic charts and systems, and we will be seeing whether that has a role in it. What we are not likely to do is impose any further restrictions on additional overlays for the charts. Obviously, Miniectus machines have radar overlays, but and AIS, but we are not envisaging any further restrictions on weather overlays or routing or anything else. So what we need to do is to make sure that the basic functions are there. As I mentioned, when the working group was initially set up, it was restricted to leisure vessels. But from discussions I've had more recently with the MCA, it appears that they now recognize that if we come up with a system that works for leisure vessels, there's no reason why it could not be extended to coded vessels, certainly within the UK. Now, the manufacturers have all been very positive in to this approach, but the one thing that has been pointed out to us is that any such recognition system needs to be international. The manufacturers do not want to find a situation where we in the UK come up with something and then in some other part of the world, possibly the US, additional requirements are imposed, or conflicting requirements, even worse. So what we need to do once we've come up with something that works for us, appears to work for us, is to engage with other bodies elsewhere, and we will be working with the MCA and through RYN's network to talk to the regulators in other countries to see that we can come up with something that's going to be workable elsewhere. And in this, really, RYN is just acting as an anonymous broker in these discussions. We don't have an axe to grind in this. We are not a manufacturer. Now, who have we been talking to? Well, the chart publishers are dominated by CMAP and Navionics, and entering in the last few years has been Raymarine with their Lighthouse charts product. And here in the UK, the only private sector company that produces electronic charts currently in raster form, as well as paper charts, is IMRAY. So we've been talking to all four of those. And what we've been discussing with them is how we can work with them to come up with a minimum standard that would make sense from their point of view and work for the MCA. Now, clearly, leisure charts are not in S57 data format. They are not compliant with that. They are not ENCs. They take data from a number of sources, not just official sources. And they also use crowdsourced information and community edits. We've discussed with them those sources and what might be possible in that respect. The one thing that the MCA on data is concerned about on data sources is the use of crowdsourced data. Now, it's been made apparent by the manufacturers that there's a difference between crowdsourced data being used in areas where there is no other data. And an example of that is inland waters in the United States, where there's a lot of crowdsourced information, and that has enabled the chart producers to prepare charts which are reasonably accurate and very useful. There's a difference between that and crowdsourced data being used in areas where there's other official data. And as far as we can see, the chart manufacturers are keeping that data in a different layer. To use just one example, Navionics has what they describe as sonar charts or navigation charts. Now, the navigation charts are basically the official data, whereas the sonar charts build on the official data using crowdsourced information. And it's that layer, which is totally separate, which is the bit that the MCA appears to have a concern about. But in the case of Navionics, and I think it's the same with CMAP, it is possible to not use the crowdsourced information and just have official data sources. So what we need to do is to drill down with the chart manufacturers to make sure that that's the case and understand the data sources, and to ensure that the MCA is going to be comfortable with any crowdsourced information being used. Clearly, from the manufacturer's point of view, crowdsourced information is very important to them, and they all market heavily on the information that they are able to provide through crowdsourcing. We don't want to interrupt that, but what we want to ensure is that the sources of information is very clear on the chart, and that is one of the problems at the moment. Most of the leisure charts do not have clear sources of clear information as to where the source data comes from. Clearly, on a paper chart, you can look at a little diagram and see when the surveys were carried out, where the latest surveys were carried out, but that is not necessarily as easy on a leisure electronic chart. Another item they mentioned is shoreline features. One of the things that we've raised in the minimum standards is the ability to take visual fixes to plot lines of position on electronic charts. And the chart publishers have pointed out that the information that's coming through from the hydrographic offices is not very good on that. We all know that if you look on a paper chart, you basically see the buildings that were there back in the 1950s at best, in some cases. And if you go to remoter parts of the British Isles, perhaps it's 19th century buildings. So there is a bit of concern there. Clearly, with modern charts, there is additional information available in the way of satellite data. A lot of that is useful, And in the case of charts that are installed on chart plotters with such satellite information, it's available at sea, whereas on iPads and other tablets, you require a data link, and that information disappears at sea. So if there is no data on the shoreline, then no shore features, then visual fixes will be next to impossible to take. The final point on this slide is the updating arrangements. The MCA have always made it clear that updating charts is a critical issue. As an aside, I noticed a few weeks back that there'd been a court case in the UK that was reported in the Times, that a ship which had gone to sea and run aground was deemed not to be seaworthy because the relevant officer on board had not updated the charts, and he had missed by not updating, he had missed a change in depth information, which, if it had been updated, might have prevented them going aground. So updating arrangements are extremely important for the MCA, and the chart publishers have all commented that they are moving to easier updating arrangements for their charts, not just the ones that are on tablets, on apps, but also the ones that are in the latest plotters, that they should be either available to be updated by Wi-Fi link if you're in a marina, or by downloading an update to a card at home and installing it in the plotter. But the idea is that any approval arrangements would include a requirement to be able to update the charts at regular intervals, and the time frame we have in square brackets at the moment is monthly. Whether that remains so or moves to something else, I don't know. But of course, that just means that the charts have to be able to be updated monthly. It's entirely up to the users to actually do it. All of our discussions have been with the chart publishers to date. The equipment manufacturers, the multifunction display manufacturers, plotter manufacturers, however you want to describe them, have not commenced, although clearly, because we've had discussions with RYA Marine and Navico have been involved in the CMAP discussions, they have some involvement, but we haven't had any proper discussions yet with the manufacturers. The reason for that is that we want to make as much progress as possible with the chart manufacturers, because we believe that that is where most of the work needs to be done. And to be fair to the chart publishers, they accept that that is the case. The equipment manufacturers, the chart plotters themselves, are not thought to be a great problem for this moving forward. As you will appreciate, most of them are moving to touchscreen technology, and there's been a huge convergence of the technology. The old problem of the equipment having lots of buttons at the side, and every manufacturer having different button arrangements, and even the same manufacturers having different button arrangements on different machines is a thing of the past. So there's the convergence makes it much easier, and presumably because they are more driven by electronics than button arrangements, then it might be easier to get some of the changes that we have in mind for them, possibly. One of the functionalities that I mention here that seems to be missing from a lot of displays is the ability to actually plot a fix. In other words, to have multiple lines of positions on a chart. From personal experience, I know that it's usually possible to put one line of position on a plotter, but not necessarily more than that. The reason for that is that the belief is that we should try to replicate some of the functionality that is available on Miniectus machines, and clearly the ability to plot a visual fix is important, and that's why it's important to have features on the shore to be able to take the fix. The other thing that we are still kicking around is S mode. That is where if you press an S button on the plotter, the machine goes into a basic standard functionality mode, and that it would be a standard arrangement across all manufacturers, so that if somebody got into a fix on a boat, perhaps something had happened to the skipper and somebody had to take over but didn't know how the machine worked, if they just pressed the S mode, it would go into a standard mode. And that would be the mode that would be taught in the classroom. So question is the S mode actually needed, or is it useful for training? And that one we're still thinking about, but I'll come on to points in a moment. So meetings to date, we've had good initial meetings with all the chart publishers, very good open discussions. All of them reported concerns. It says most, actually one of them didn't, but that's neither here nor there. It reported concerns with their non-approved status. It rankles with all of them. One of them mentioned that their charts were actually being used on naval vessels in a particular country, and the fact that they crank up with a warning screen saying not to be used for navigation is a problem. But as I mentioned, that it will need to be negotiated with the hydrographic officers if we are to remove it. And indeed, if that is removed, then we've got, last point here, the legal disclaimer liability issue to deal with. In other words, if there is a problem with the chart, whose responsibility is it? And actually, I think it should be relatively easy to work out whose responsibility it is, but whether the lawyers can come up with something that is workable is a piece of work for another day. So all of the chart manufacturers would like to find a route to recognition. They all saw the benefit of it, and they want to be involved with the project. None of them saw deal breaker issues, although number raised questions in the meeting, but we don't believe any of them are serious problems. So hopefully things will progress well with the chart manufacturers. We want to have another round of meetings with them before we move on to the equipment manufacturers, who are the usual suspects of RYA Marine, Navico, and Garmin. There are a number of other small UK manufacturers who we'll speak to as well, but clearly the big ones are the ones that we want to get to, and if we can reach agreement with them as to minimum standards that would be workable from their point of view and also acceptable to the MCA and other regulators, then we're going to make some progress. So coming to the end of this talk, what we in RYN would like to hear back from you as instructors and examiners is your views on current systems. I know that stepping onto a new to me boat as an examiner, you will find a range of different equipment, and it is always difficult to use it. What we're not looking to do is to have a retrospective approval system. It will only be current models and future models that are likely to be approved under this. But what we want to know from you is what is lacking from current leisure charts. Are there any problems with the current leisure charts as you see them? Is there anything confusing in those charts? And what issues arise through zooming? Well, we all know the problem about disappearing reefs and traffic separation schemes, and those are clearly being discussed with the manufacturers at the moment. But what other problems, apart from the really obvious, have you picked up, if there are any? What is lacking from the display systems? What features would you like to see on them? And would an S mode be of any benefit to you as an instructor? Would it be of use to be able to instruct in the classroom or at sea in S mode, which would have a range of basic simple functions which could be taught easily and which would apply across the bulk of modern equipment? And what additional functionality could be usefully added, and anything else that you would like to raise? So just winding up, thank you for listening. RYN has a virtual stand at this conference, and questions can be asked there and ideas exchanged, or if you miss that, then send me an email to scgchair@ryn.org.uk. Once again, many thanks for listening. Goodbye.